So we have our equation, mv equals py. Now let's play with it. So here's your scenario. Suppose that y, real output, is held constant. I don't think I ever told you why we use y to represent output. The reason is because on a lot of our graphs, it's going to be the vertical axis. That's the only reason. So we hold y constant. We suppose that in this scenario, there's no extra output, there's no lower output, but we increase M. The money supply somehow expands. It could be done through the money issuer, the government creating more money, as they did, say, when they issued those stimulus checks during COVID, or it could be done through the action of the banks lowering the reserve ratios and making more loans. Now, if y is staying constant, that implies loosely that v is also probably staying constant. If you don't have extra sales being made, if you don't have extra commerce, there's no reason that dollars would be changing hands more often. So y staying the same implies that v would also stay the same, which means that the left-hand side, the total amount of money being spent, stays or goes up. Now, how did we define GDP? We defined it as the total amount of money being spent. And so that too needs to go up. But GDP has two components, output and prices. And if output's staying the same, but output times prices is going up, then prices must be going up. The only way for the identity to hold is for P to increase. Now, that's your quick and dirty explanation for why you would expect an increase in the money supply to drive prices up. But it's not especially informative by itself. And so we're going to look at a little bit more involved of an explanation that revolves around the way that money circulates through an economy. So, how does inflation operate on an economy? Well, we'll see that in the long run, inflation has no effects because the money has a chance to circulate through the whole economy. But in the short run, it's going to benefit the money creator at everyone else's expense. So, suppose you create some money, and because you've just created the money, there's no change in prices yet. Money's not chasing after goods. Nobody is bidding up the price with it. Everything is the same as before. But you, the government, or the bank, or the gold mine owner, spend the money. Now, remember, producers are all consumers too. The only reason why we produce, for the most part, is so that we can consume. And your expenditures are someone else's income. Every dollar you give to that producer either becomes their personal income or it becomes income for the people in their supply chain, for all of the producers that they have to pay for inputs in the production of their good. So your expenditure becomes somebody else's income. That means their income goes up, which means that there's a positive demand shock for normal goods. Now, there's also going to be a negative demand shock for inferior goods. But, as I told you way back in the demand lecture, most goods are normal. By default, we assume that a good is normal. And so this means that we can expect that most industries experience this positive demand shock. And what does the positive demand shock do? Well, when you have a positive demand shock, you have an increase in the quantity traded and an increase in the price. So the price goes up. But these people who are buying goods, they have the same effect on the economy that you do. Their expenditures are also somebody else's income. And so that too is going to cause a positive demand shock on normal goods, which will then cause another positive demand shock on normal goods. And on it goes. The process repeats itself. The money, it's like throwing a stone into a lake. You get these ripple effects. You get these waves of prices being driven up as more and more people find their income increasing. But the problem is, at some point, this has to turn. See, as money circulates, drives all prices up. There are two issues here. One is that while normally goods are substitutes, by default, we tend to assume that any two goods are substitutes because a price increase on good X raises its opportunity cost in terms of other goods or in terms of leisure. While this may be true of any given pairwise comparison, if goods don't have some specific relationship to each other that makes you want to buy them together, when you compare any one good to all other goods as a bundle, we tend to find that that looks much more like a complement. If you think about it, if the price of one good goes up, are you likely to buy more of other things or less of other things? Well, in all likelihood, you're going to buy more of other things. But if the price of everything except for one item is going up, are you going to buy more of that cheap item or less of it? You're probably going to buy less of it because that one item can't substitute for all of the functions of these other products. And so, as the circulation of the currency, as this ripple effect of positive demand shocks drives up the prices of everything, it starts to turn from being positive demand shocks to negative demand shocks. And it also has an impact on supply. Increasing factor of production prices is going to cause negative supply shocks too. And so if we're having negative shocks, then the quantity traded has to fall. The economy has to return to its old size. And the supply shocks and the demand shocks are going to fight each other. But we know that they'll have to settle at a higher level because that equality still has to hold. Money that's in circulation has to be spent. If it's not being spent, it's not in circulation in the first place. And so you wind up with higher prices. But it's higher prices on everything. It's higher prices on goods, it's higher prices on rent, it's higher prices for wages, for labor. Wages and income also go up as well. The underlying problem is that if everything becomes more expensive by the same percent, then the opportunity costs don't change. The money does not reflect real costs in resources, labor. It's only a unit of account. It's just a way of keeping score. Give you a numerical example. Suppose you have $100 and there's two goods that you like to buy, gewgaws and baubles. And gewgaws are $10 and baubles are 20. Now, how many of each could you buy if you dedicated your whole income to it? And what's the opportunity cost? If we know these three things, then that gives us a complete picture of what the quality of life is like. Well, 100 divided by 10 would be 5. You could have 5 gewgaws if you bought nothing but gewgaws. 100 divided by 20. Oh, whoops, that should be 10. 100 divided by 20 is 5 baubles. And baubles are twice as expensive as gewgaws, so for every bauble you buy, you have to give up 2 gewgaws. Now, let's suppose that the price of everything doubles. The money that was created fully circulates through the economy. And now you have $200 in income. Gewgaws cost $20 and baubles cost $40. Then you'd be able to afford 10 gewgaws or 5 baubles. And if you want to buy a bauble, you have to give up 2 gewgaws to get it. None of the real world trade-offs have changed just because the price level has changed. See, in the long term, inflation has no effects because of the neutrality of money. We say that money is neutral. It cannot affect commerce in and of itself. Because money is just a medium of exchange, a unit of count, a store of value. It's not a good in and of itself. It's not a resource in and of itself. Money is a fiction that people believe in, that people adopt to simplify commerce. And so the prices of things in terms of money have to reflect underlying real world trade-offs in terms of resources. And so if you just increase the amount or decrease the amount of money in circulation, the prices and incomes are all going to adjust around that to keep the same relationship, to keep the same proportions to each other. But that's only in the long term. That's only when the ripples have died down. It's only when the money has circulated fully. The metaphor of circulation is a very old one. The circulatory system, like your literal hardened blood, that had been discovered recently when economics emerged as a field. And so economists would often make metaphors to it. They would allude to it. But yeah, when it runs a full cycle through the economy, a full cycle through the body, everything should be back to its old state. Everything has been replenished. In the short term, though, inflation does have effects. It has, first, the ripple effects of increased demand and then it has the ripple effects of decreased supply. And this is going to play a large role in Keynes's version of the business cycle. He only talked about the supply falling. He didn't talk about negative demand shocks being caused by this. But in our next topic, we'll dig into Keynes and look at that more closely using the framework he set out. But inflation can also have effects through other problems, things like price confusion or money illusion. Oftentimes, people make mistakes because they just forget that the trade-offs have changed. They're so used to thinking in terms of old prices that they will overreact to a change in the price. Mostly you see this with old people, stingy old geezers. I had this neighbor I grew up next to. It was an old woman, old widow, and she'd often conscript me to do yard work, and I would have done it for free, but you know she'd pay me for it. But boy was she stingy. And I kind of think that she knew that prices were higher than they used to be, but she'd kind of play dumb about it. So you do a 2 hours of work for her, and she'd give me like $5, or you do an hour of work for her and she'd give you $2 and tell you, oh, go get yourself a milkshake. And it's like I can't afford the milkshake with this. This won't pay the full price of the milkshake. We see that with old people all the time, don't we? They're living in the past. And we see this with young people too. When you live in a time where prices change very rapidly, it's common for people to overreact or underreact to a price shift. Either because it feels temporary, because you haven't fully adjusted your behavior, you end up buying more than you should. You're not responding to the whole everything's becoming more expensive phase fast enough. Or you overreact to it because your income has gone up, but you don't feel wealthier. People whine when they go to the store, and you know you can't buy a gallon of milk for a nickel anymore. It's like grandpa. People make a heck of a lot more money than they used to. You know, you lived in a tin shack back in your day. That's one way that inflation can distort an economy. What's much more significant is a thing called sticky prices. Some prices just can't change as fast as others. Make this a little stopping point.